Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Very good evening to everyone here, alhamdulillah, and those who are watching us online, right, on YouTube, I think on YouTube tonight, right. So tonight, inshallah, alhamdulillah, we have Brother Bashir Castineiro from Spain with us again to continue the series on the Khulafa Ar-Rashidun, right, on the Sirah right, four rightly guided caliphs. And today we're going to be covering a little bit of event in the period of the Khulafa Ar-Rashidun, right? We wanted actually to cover the first part of Sayyidina Uthman tonight, but then we thought that it was too close to Ramadan and we're going to be taking a break in Ramadan. So we thought, why don't we go and find something that connects all of them together? And we thought, okay, mashallah, I think the Quran would be something that's really beneficial for us to cover. And also because I had one occasion when I spoke about this to someone, and someone asked me, hey, how did the Quran come about as it is? And so I thought that maybe this would be a good thing for us to cover, inshallah. So without further ado then, I'll pass the microphone then to Brother Bashir Castineiro to take us away then, inshallah. Fadal, inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين وارض اللهم عن الخلفاء الراشدين الحنفاء ساداتنا وأئمتنا أبي بكر وعمر وعثمان وعلي وعن سائر الصحابة أجمعين وخصوصا منهم الأنصار والمهاجرين وعن التابعين وتابع التابعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين اللهم انفعنا بمحبتهم واحشرنا يا مولانا في زمرتهم ولا تخالفنا اللهم عن نهجهم وعن طريقتهم وسندهم يا أرحم الراحمين يا أكرم الأكرمين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Good evening everyone, and thank you for coming again this Friday evening. As Sidi Amran just mentioned, we're still within the series of the Khulafa Ar-Rashidun, the four first caliphs of Islam, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali, and their lifetimes, their khilafas and their deeds and what they did for Islam. But we decided, like he just mentioned, that instead of continuing with Uthman, it would be the turn of Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu tonight. But we're going to postpone Uthman until after Ramadan. And the theme for today is the Quran, the compilation of the Quran, and how the Sahaba, particularly the Khulafa, dealt with the crisis, we call it in the title. I'll go into detail a little bit about this word. But it was a Quran that were there, and the Huffaz from among the Sahaba who were still alive, and they got together and they brought about this Mus'haf that we see and we know today. It would have been a different story and a different scenario, and we could have ended up like the Christians or other religions arguing about their book, astaghfirullah, and this wouldn't happen because Allah promised to protect His book. We'll talk about this. So this is going to be a very short summary of the compilation of the Quran, of what happened to the Quran and how it was gathered and compiled into one book between two covers. And this happened, of course, within the time of the Khulafa. Before the end of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, this was already done. So this happened in the first generations of Islam, within the lifetimes of the best of the Sahaba, who were the Khulafa Ar-Rashidun and their generation. So this was, remember, 30 years. We mentioned the hadith before, in which the Prophet ﷺ said, the Khilafah after me, or the Khilafah in my ummah, will be for 30 years. 30 years. Then after that, there will come a kingship, or there will come, in another version, in another riwayah of the hadith, difficulty and fitna, or a cruel kingship. And this is exactly what happened. You know, in the time of Ali already, the fitnas started, and after Ali, radiallahu anhu, the whole thing was messed up, and the issue of leadership in the ummah became what's the word I'm looking for? A conflict between people who wanted leadership. So the time of the first 4 Khalifas, remember, 30 years, it was 2 years of Abu Bakr, the Khilafah of Abu Bakr, which was very and we covered all his Khilafah very briefly in the last 2 sessions. Then the Khilafah of Uthman, radiallahu anhu, which was the longest, it was 12 years long, about 12 years, until Uthman was murdered. And then Ali, radiallahu anhu, his Khilafah was about 5 years. That all makes a total of 29 years and a few months, almost 30 years, just like the Prophet ﷺ had predicted. So the Quran, our theme tonight, our topic, the Quran is preserved and protected, as we all know. And we as Muslims, this is something that we are proud of, that we normally talk about, and we say and we know that the Quran is protected, is preserved. It is one Quran. It is one Quran, no matter where you go in the Ummah. If you go to Morocco, or you go to Algeria, or Turkey, or Pakistan, or Indonesia, or Malaysia, or you go to Saudi Arabia, or Oman, Jordan, no matter where you go in the Ummah, you will find one Quran. All the Muslims agree on one Quran. There's no other book, or there's no disagreement at all. Not like the Bible, the New Testament, the Old Testament. You know all about it. This. I come from Spain. The Bible there is in Spanish. They consider that the Bible, and it's in Spanish. Of course, they have the Latin, but then if you go to England or you go to France, everyone has their Bible, and you know all about it. We're not going to go into this matter, but there is a lot of controversy around the issue of the scripts and the original book of Jesus. The Quran is preserved, and this is because Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, in Surah Al-Hijr, ayah number 9, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إنا نحن نزلنا الذكر وإنا له لحافظون. This is a promise by Allah. He's saying, we have revealed this reminder, we have revealed the Quran, and we are going to protect it. We will preserve it. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying to us, we have revealed it, we have transmitted and given the Quran to you through Jibreel alayhi salam and through Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and it is going to be preserved. I will protect it, Allah says. So this is a promise that Allah made. And of course, to fulfill this promise, He used some of His slaves, some of His best servants. And this is how Allah makes things. When He wants to do something, and to do something with barakah especially, He uses people He loves. So of course He used the Prophet ﷺ, the best of creation. Secondly, He used His companions, the best of His companions, starting with the Sahaba and following with some of the starting with the Khulafa Ar-Rashidun, the 4 Khulafa, and following with some of the best Sahaba. And we'll mention some names like Zayd ibn Thabit, Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman. We'll mention some of the names of these Sahaba. So there are a number of stages in the compilation of the Quran. If we're going to talk about the compilation of the Quran and how it became this mushaf, this book, in between 2 covers that we know today, this compilation has a number of different stages. We could say that these stages, the major ones, are 3. They could be summarized in 3 stages. Number 1, the stage of the time of the Prophet ﷺ himself. How was the Quran compiled in the time of the Prophet ﷺ? Number two, the compilation of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And we mentioned this when we talked about Abu Bakr. We'll go over it again. Number three, the stage number three, the compilation of Sayyidina Uthman. May Allah be pleased with him. And we haven't reached there. This is going to be discussed in the stage or the phase of the Khilafah of Uthman. So inshallah after Ramadan we'll talk about it, but we'll go into it, we'll advance into it a little bit today. So these are the three main phases before we got this universal mushaf that is known in the whole ummah. So let's go one by one. First, the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Quran was being revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam through Jibreel alayhi salam, as we know, within a time span of 23 years. Thank you. 23 years was the time of prophethood, since the bi'tha, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was 40, until he passed away when he was 63. Right? 23 years. 13 years in Mecca, then the Hijrah, then 10 years in Medina. So 23 years of revelation. When the Quran was revealed, first the Sahaba memorized it. Most of them would memorize the Quran. The Prophet ﷺ himself would memorize it, and most of the Sahaba would also memorize the Quran by heart. Not all of them memorized everything, we mentioned this before, but most of the Sahaba, a lot of them did memorize the whole Quran. The other way of preserving the Quran within the time of the Prophet ﷺ was by writing it. He already ordered some of the companions to start writing. And a lot of people don't know this. They think it's only Abu Bakr, or even some people think it's only in the times of Uthman that it started. No, in the time of the Prophet, the Quran was already being written. So he would order himself, some of the companions, to go get some scraps and write parts of the Quran. Alright? So each Sahaba would have a different number of surahs or ayats in his house, in different scraps, pieces of different things. Leather, mainly camel leather. They would also use bones, camel bones mainly, and they would use probably the shoulder bones, which are flat and big. They would also use palm tree leaves, date tree leaves, because they didn't have paper, remember. Paper only came into the Ummah about 200 or 300 years after the Prophet ﷺ, through the Chinese. The Prophet ﷺ used to command some of his Sahaba to write the Quran down. Was Zayd ibn Thabit. Zayd ibn Thabit was perhaps the most famous one of the Sahaba who used to write the Quran for the Prophet. The most prominent secretary or Sahabi who would be in charge of writing the Quran. Zayd ibn Thabit was a young man who was very intelligent. He was from Medina when the Prophet ﷺ arrived. He was his neighbor in Medina, and he was a very intelligent young man. So like I mentioned, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, already a lot of the Sahaba memorized the whole Quran, which was enough, and their hifz, their memorization was very, very strong. Remember that this society of the Arabs, where the Prophet ﷺ was sent, was a society that didn't read or write. They were illiterate, most of them. And they didn't have books. They would base their knowledge on memorization. So history, poetry, whatever culture they would have. Poetry, they had a lot of poetry, and we talked about their festivals and the competitions they would have on poetry. So a lot of the culture they had was preserved by memorization. So their hifz was very strong. So they would memorize the Quran, and apart from that, they would also, a lot of them, write into the Quran on little pieces of scraps. The time of Sayyidina Abu Bakr, the compilation of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. Right, the Prophet ﷺ passes away in the beginning of the 11th year of the Hijrah. Remember, he spent 13 years in Mecca as a prophet, and then he moved to Medina, he made the Hijrah, and 10 years passed, and he passed away in the 11th year, the beginning of the 11th year. He did the Hajj, remember he managed to do the last Hajj, Hajjatul Wada'. When was that? End of the 10th year. Dhul Hijjah is the last year of the month of the Hajj. So he did the Hajj in Dhul Hijjah, the 10th year finished, and he started the new year, the 11th year of the Hijrah, and he passed away in Rabi' al-Awwal. Muharram Safar, Rabi' al-Awwal, 3rd month of the year. So basically 3 months after Hajj, he did Hajj, Hajjatul Wada', the farewell Hajj, it is called, and then 3 months after, he passed away. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. That was the 11th year of the Hijrah. Right, so Abu Bakr takes on the Khilafah, he becomes Khalifatu Rasulillah, the leader of the Muslims, and 1 year after, in the 12th year of the Hijrah, there was an event that took place, and we mentioned this also when we talked about the life of Sayyidina Abu Bakr, and this is the Battle of Yamama, the Battle of Yamama, against Musaylima al-Kadhdhab. Musaylima was this false prophet. Al-Kadhdhab means the liar. Musaylima, the liar. He claimed to be a prophet and he fought the Muslims. And so there was a big battle called the Battle of Yamama. And a lot of the Huffaz died in that battle. It is said that up to 70 of the Sahaba who had memorized the whole Quran passed away in that battle. So Umar radiallahu anh, who was one of the closest advisors of the Khalifa of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, came back to Medina and he advised the Khalifa to compile all the scripts of the Quran into one book. He said, look, Abu Bakr, if we don't take action now, all the Sahaba who know the Quran by heart are going to start dying one by one, and there will be a point where there will be hardly any Huffaz, or the Huffaz that we will have will be, from second, third generations who had memorized the Quran from the Sahaba, from the Tabi'in, but it's going to be faded in somehow with the passing of years. The original Huffaz from the Sahaba, who were the ones who were with the Prophet ﷺ when the Quran was revealed, and who knew very well the dialects of the Arabs. We'll talk about this because there were 7 main dialects of the Arab tribes. We'll talk about this. This is the origin of the qira'at, the 7 qira'at that we know nowadays. But the Sahaba were going to be dying, especially with these battles, with the growing of Islam. They were going to faraway lands, and some of them were passing away. So Umar said to Abu Bakr, please do something. And I advise you to gather all the Sahaba, the remaining Sahaba who know the Quran, to get them to bring all the scripts they have from the Quran and put them together between 2 covers to make a book. So at the beginning, Sayyidina Abu Bakr was reluctant. He said, how should I do something that the Prophet ﷺ himself didn't do? So he was doubtful for some time, but Umar was so certain about his decision or his criteria that he insisted, and Abu Bakr, of course, searched for different opinions. He spoke to the other Sahaba, and eventually he was convinced by Umar, and he realized that this was the right decision, and there was nothing wrong with gathering all the scripts of Quran that the Prophet ﷺ himself had already ordered to be written. So what did he do? He called the one Sahabi who was most famous at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and whom the Prophet himself had given preference over the others. This was Zayd ibn Thabit. So Zayd ibn Thabit was called by the Khalifa Abu Bakr, and he was told to gather, first to make a committee to take a number of the best and most knowledgeable Sahaba, and then to gather all the scraps that were among the Sahaba and to compile them into one book. So this was done. And Sayyidina Zayd ibn Thabit radiallahu anhu was himself also reluctant at the beginning, because he thought this was too much of a task. This was too heavy of a burden for him to carry, to gather the Quran, the book of Allah, the word of Allah, and to take all the Sahaba, gather all. Although he was a very good hafiz himself, he could have revised the thing himself, but he knew it was such a big task. He gathered a number of the biggest companions and made a committee, and he also created a very, very meticulous method to gather all the ayat that were written down. He made sure that nothing was out of place. Of course, he used the order that the Prophet ﷺ had recited the Quran in before he passed away. In the last Ramadan, he recited the Quran in the order that we know, from Surah Al-Fatiha until Surah Al-Nas. Remember, in the times of this is not the order how the Quran was revealed. You have to remember, Iqra was the first surah to be revealed. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. And the ayat were revealed, and then they were put in different order. It's not the order that we recite in now. But the Prophet ﷺ, before he passed away, he recited the whole Quran in this order. So the Sahaba knew this, and when Zayd ibn Thabit was compiling the Quran, he put it together in this same order. And then like I said, he put up a very, very strict and meticulous method where every ayah of the Quran or every surah that would come to him had to go through the major huffaz of the Sahaba. Himself, first of all, he knew the Quran, so he would revise it himself, and then he would put it through the major Sahaba who were in that group to also revise it. And it was a condition that the Quran that was brought to him, the piece of script, was brought by a Sahabi, and that Sahabi had to be present at the time of revelation. So imagine, it was a very strict method, and once it was put together with the agreement of all the major Sahaba, of course there was no doubt about it. Of course, this was a very, very basic way of writing. You have to bear in mind that they didn't have the diacritical marks, they didn't have the dots, they didn't have the harakat, tashkil, the vowels. It was a very basic writing. But of course, they would keep the order and the structure of the writing of the ayat. So this was done in the times of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. We go to the third point, to the third phase, to the third stage of the compilation of the Quran. This is a very brief summary. I'm repeating it. The third stage is the compilation of Uthman radiallahu anhu, which is what we're going to talk about within his Khilafah, but we're coming in his Khilafah just for this matter of the Quran. Because if we want to understand the whole compilation, the process of the compilation of the Quran, we have to look at, I said, these three stages: the times of the Prophet, the time of Abu Bakr, and the time of Uthman. And we see how the four Khulafa played a role, a very important role, in this process of compiling the Quran. First, Abu Bakr decided to compile the Quran in his time under the advice of Sayyidina Umar. So they both played a role there. Then Uthman, as we're going to see now, was also playing a very, very important role, perhaps the most out of all of them. And then Ali was also supporting Uthman. So the compilation of Uthman. In the times of Uthman, another incident happened. Now remember that Sayyidina Abu Bakr decided to compile the Quran on the 12th year of the Hijrah, right? After the event of the Battle of Yamama. So 15 years passed. That Mus'haf was kept with Abu Bakr. Nothing was done. It was just like a precaution measurement. right? He foresaw, with the help of Umar, of course, what was going to happen in the near future. So he did this compilation and he kept it. And it was just there. 15 years passed and another incident happened. A very different type of event or incident happened. This was 15 years later, during the time of Uthman. And this was a battle that, not a battle, an expedition that was going to Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is a land which nowadays is still if you look at the map, there is a country called Azerbaijan, an independent country. This is a land as far north as Turkey. It's on the east of Turkey, above Iran. So you can see how far the borders of the Muslim Ummah had reached already by the times of Uthman. So the Muslims had already reached Azerbaijan, which is next to Turkey, almost in Russia. So a contingent of the Muslims was in that land, in Azerbaijan. Some of the new Muslims were saying, this is recited like this because I heard from such man who heard from such Sahabi. Another man from probably a very different, very far away land said, no, this is recited like this. It's different because I heard it from this man who heard it from this Sahabi. Right? And this was still in the time of Uthman. Only, 15 plus 12, 27th year of the Hijrah. 27th year of the Hijrah. And also remember that some of these new Muslims were not Arabs. They were A'jam. So their pronunciation of the Quran, of the Arabic language, it would be somehow, it would have errors and mistakes because they didn't have the Arabic language. It wasn't their mother tongue, like it's not mine or most of you, right? But now we're protected. There's one mushaf and the rules of tajweed and so many other things have been developed. But this was the beginning of the times of Islam. Remember, there were no books. Only one compilation was in Medina, and that had been done by Abu Bakr. There was no books. There was no mushaf like here now. So the Muslims, especially the new Muslims, who were coming from the new lands that had been conquered, they were agreeing and even fighting over particular ayat. So who saw this? One of the Sahaba saw this incident happening. The Sahabi who saw this was Hudayfa ibn al-Yamam. Hudayfa ibn al-Yamam. This Hudayfa radiallahu anhu was the one called Aminu Rasulillah, the one who kept the secrets of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Prophet had told him particular information that only he was told. He had some secrets told by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Hudayfa ibn al-Yamam. This is the Sahabi who also played a very important role in the compilation of the Quran because he was present at that camp in Azerbaijan, and this is a hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, and this name is mentioned, Azerbaijan, this land. So when Hudayfa saw this, he immediately left the camp. He headed back to Medina. When he reached Medina, it is said that he didn't even go to his house to greet his family because of the importance of the matter. He went straight to the Khalifa and he said, Ya Uthman, adrik hadhihi al-ummah, adrik hadhihi al-ummah, catch this ummah or save this ummah, preserve this ummah before what happened to the Christians and the Jews happened to us. So again, this is the same situation or very similar situation as what we had with Umar and Abu Bakr. One of the Sahaba saw the danger of what the Ummah was going to be facing in the near future, and he warned the Khalifa. He advised the Khalifa to take action. So he said, Ya Uthman, save this Ummah and do not let it happen what happened to the Jews and Christians. You must do something to prevent coming generations from fighting and the fear over the Quran. So Uthman heard the story and he said to Hudayfa, I want you to tell the same story to some of the major Sahaba. So in Medina, he set up a majlis, a gathering with some of the major Sahaba, and he brought Hudayfa and he said to him, please tell them what's happening in the faraway lands. Remember, Azerbaijan is very far away. In those days, it could be, I don't know, maybe 2 months travel by camel, easily. It's almost in Russia. Is where Chechnya is, next to Georgia, Armenia, just next to Turkey, east of Turkey. So he said, this is what's happening in the faraway lands of our reign now. We are growing and our lands, the lands of the Muslims, are going further and further, and they're covering new cultures, new peoples, new cities and countries. And this is what's happening now. People are differing and fighting over the recitation of the Quran. This is the witness, Hudayfa ibn al-Imam, the keeper of the secrets of the Prophet ﷺ. He's going to tell you what is going on in those places. So all the Sahaba heard the story and they agreed that Uthman should gather again the remaining Huffaz, take the Mus'haf that Abu Bakr had written, and to make an official copy of the Quran. So Uthman gathers the major Sahaba, the major Huffaz from among the Sahaba. They unanimously agree that the unique Mus'haf should be written, and that the whole Quran should be compiled in one Mus'haf, in one book. Mus'haf comes from Safha, page. So Mus'haf is basically a book which has pages. So Uthman asked for the Mus'haf that was commanded to write by Abu Bakr. Who had this Mus'haf? I think I mentioned it. Hafsa bintu Umar. Hafsa bintu Umar. Hafsa is the daughter of Umar. Because when Abu Bakr died, he passed it to Umar, to the next Khalifa. Umar kept it for his Khilafah. He didn't do anything with it. He didn't see the need to do anything. He thought it was already enough. And when he passed away, radiallahu anhu, he gave it to his daughter, to Hafsa, to keep it. So Uthman asked Hafsa to bring the Mus'haf, and it was given again to a group of chosen Sahaba to look through it with the remaining Huffaz from among the Sahaba, and to write a universal Mus'haf, a universal copy of the Quran, and to then send a copy to each one of the main lands. So again, for a third time, he had Zayd ibn Thabit radiallahu anhu to do this job, along with another three companions, and he made 5 copies, 5 official copies of the Quran. These became to be known as Al-Mushaf Al-Uthmani. So the Mus'haf we have today, and if you take one, in a lot of the Mus'hafs you can even see that is written Al-Mushaf Al-Uthmani, the Uthmani Mus'haf. Because he's the one who wrote 5 official copies. Again, it was taken from the copy of Sayyidina Abu Bakr and revised Kufa and Basra. These were the major regions of newly conquered lands. So one Mus'haf was sent to Syria, Sham area, one was sent to Kufa, and another one to Basra, and 2 copies were kept in Medina. One for the people of Medina and Arabia, that region, and the other one for the Khalifa himself. And this is the copy that Uthman radiallahu anhu was reading, physically reading the night he was, or the evening he was murdered, and on which the blood splat. And we will talk about this inshallah in the talk about Sayyidina Uthman. And there is a very important element here. When he sent a Mus'haf to each one of the major cities or regions, he sent it along with a qari. He sent not only the mushaf, he sent a qari, one of the most knowledgeable Sahaba who had the knowledge of qira'ah, who was with the Prophet ﷺ at the time of revelation, who had memorized the whole Quran, and who was known to be a good hafiz and qari. So the mushaf was sent to each one of the regions with a man. And this is a very important element. We don't take the knowledge from books. The books are there as a backup. And this whole story of the compilation of the Quran is a proof of that. And actually we don't call the book the Quran. Technically, we don't call the book the Quran. Bring me the Quran, give me the Quran. We should say the mushaf. The Quran is something bigger. This is the word of Allah. This is just a written copy of the Quran, right? The mushaf. The mushaf is a written copy of the Quran, and it's a backup. You know, if there's any argument, oh, how is this ayah? Is it, ta'lamun or ta'rifun, for example, which is the same meaning. Ta'rifun, ta'lamun is the same meaning in Arabic, but the ayah is ta'lamun. It's like that. It's written like that. It was revealed like that. So you go back to the mushaf and you can check. But the knowledge itself is transmitted from man to man. It's a human chain. This is how the knowledge is really transmitted and how knowledge must be taken. So Uthman and all the Sahaba knew this. He sent the mushaf, and the mushaf would be kept in an official building, perhaps in the Baytul Mal or the house of the Khalifa, Allah knows, as a backup, you know, if there was any disagreement or discussion about it. But the Qari was actually the man who was going to teach the people. The Qari, the reciter from the Sahaba, was the man in charge of teaching the new Muslims and the people of that area how the Quran was recited. So he did that. He sent one to each of the major regions, and along with the mushaf, he sent a man, a Sahabi, who was a hafiz. He kept 2 in Medina, and the rest of the copies, he said, burn them. Get rid of them, burn them, which is the respectful way to get rid of a piece of Quran, written copy of Quran, or anything that has the name of Allah, and we know this, so that there would be no more confusion. All right. So he said, whoever has any other copy of the Quran that he wrote himself or that he inherited from maybe his father who was a Sahabi, please put it together and burn it, so that Zayd ibn Thabit and this group of companions have done this job. It is all compiled here under or following the mushaf, the original mushaf written by Abu Bakr. So please, everyone else should get their mushafs or scraps or pieces of Quran and burn them. And from then we have the official mushaf Uthmani, al-mushaf al-Uthmani. Now because of this, alhamdulillah, the Quran was preserved, and because of the efforts of the Sahaba, we have the Quran that we have today, and there is no arguing, there is no difference between a mushaf here or a mushaf in Pakistan because of this effort, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like I said, used these men, these Sahaba, to fulfill His promise of preserving and protecting the Quran. Our ummah has never differed over the Quran since then. There is one universal Quran. It is one message. We all know it, and it is the same for all of us. And there are no other versions. In the times of Azerbaijan and this event that happened in the time of Uthman radiallahu anhu, it is said that even some ayats, some words were being changed, like what I mentioned about ta'lamun and ta'rifun. There is one famous ayah in Surah Al-Qari'ah, which you all know, كَالْعِهْنِ الْمَنْفُوشِ يَوْمَ تَكُونُ الْجِبَالُ كَالْعِهْنِ الْمَنْفُوشِ يَوْمَ تَكُونُ الْجِبَالُ كَالْعِهْنِ الْمَنْفُوشِ. It's talking about Yawm al-Qiyamah. That day, the mountains will be like carded wool. Al-'ihn is wool, according to the lahja, the dialect of the Quraysh. But according to other dialects, wool is said suf, suf. So some people were saying, instead of كالعهن المنفوش يوم تكون الجبال كالصوف المنفوش. Some people were reciting like this because the meaning is exactly the same, right? But the Quran was revealed كالعهن المنفوش. So even though the meaning is the same, you cannot change the word. And suf, to this day in modern Arabic, is wool, is the most famous word for wool. So عهن is not so common. Suf is the word you would learn when you learn Arabic for wool. So these things were happening at the time of Uthman. And after he compiled the 5 official copies, it never happened anymore. The tashkil was not put onto the letters. That happened at least 1 century after the time of Uthman radiallahu anhu. The first person to put the tashkil, the harakat, the vowels, on the Quran was Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali. Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali was a student of Sayyidina Ali. So Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu was also playing a role in this. Some people say that already in the time of Ali radiallahu anhu, the tashkil was put onto the Quran. But the most known opinion is that it was Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali, his student, his pupil. And that happened almost 100 years, almost at the end of the 1st century of the Hijrah. So I think that was pretty much a summary of what the compilation of the Quran was, and how Allah protected this book, and how Allah protected us from having any discussions or arguments or fights over different versions of the Quran. There's one small thing that some people might ask about. And this is the matter of the 7 qira'at. 7 qira'at. The way most Muslims in the world recite the Quran is بِرِوَايَةِ Hafs and Asim. 90% of the Ummah recites the Quran بِرِوَايَةِ Hafs and Asim, in the riwayah or the version of Hafs from Asim. You might have heard of this. Asim is one of the 7 qaris, one of the 7 qurra. There are 7 recitations, 7 ways of reciting the Quran. This doesn't change the text. Like I said, you cannot change, it doesn't change in such a way that you change a whole word. تَعْلَمُونَ تُتَعْرِفُونَ or كَالْعِهْنِ الْمَنْفُوشِ كَالصُّوفِ الْمَنْصُوفِ. This doesn't happen. It's one Quran. But when the Quran was revealed, remember that the Arabs didn't have a standard Arabic. They didn't have books. They didn't have a dictionary. They didn't have an academy of Arabic language. So Arabic was just the language, and it had slight differences according to the region and the tribes. Even nowadays, for example, with English, it happens to all languages. Just take English as an example. It's not the same. The English is not the same in Malaysia as it is in the US, as it is in Australia or New Zealand or South Africa or England. And even the same word can be spelt the same way and can be pronounced in a different manner in different lands. And sometimes there is difference in the way of spelling the words. And we know about this. American English, British English, there are different ways of spelling the words. So this would happen, of course, even more during the times of the Arabs. They didn't even have writing. Very, very few people would write. Uthman was one of them, remember? And Umar ibn al-Khattab was one of them. But most of the Arabs, including the Prophet ﷺ, was not a man who could write. He was illiterate. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ. We sent from among the Ummiyin, the illiterate people, a prophet who was from them. And then he said, النَّبِيُّ الْأُمِّيُّ in another ayah of the Quran, the illiterate prophet who could not read or write. So this was the main situation with most of the Arabs. Now, if you go to different areas, they would have different accents, or different dialects even, different lahjas, dialects. And the Prophet ﷺ was given the Quran. He would teach it to the different Sahaba. They would go to their regions or villages. They would teach it to their people. And, for example, some people would pronounce tu'minun. Some other people would pronounce tu'minun. Right? Then they would come back to the Prophet ﷺ and recite to him, and he would accept from all of them. So this means that all these dialects, mainly 7 dialects, were accepted by the Prophet ﷺ. There is one particular incident that took place. This was Umar ibn al-Khattab, who heard a Sahabi called Hisham ibn al-Hakim. Hisham ibn al-Hakim was a companion. He was reciting Quran in the prayer, in Salah, and he was saying something different to how Umar would recite it. So Umar said, I was about to get hold of him and drag him to the Prophet ﷺ, but I controlled myself and I waited until he finished the Salah. You know how Umar was. We talked about his character. He controlled himself until the end of the Salah. He finished the Salah and then he went to grabbed him and dragged him to the Prophet ﷺ. And he said, look at this man. He's reciting the Quran in a different way. The Prophet said, calm down, Umar. Let him go. Let him recite. So this companion, Hisham ibn al-Hakim, then recited, and this was a part of Surah Al-Furqan. This is a famous hadith. He recited this part of Surah Al-Furqan, and the Prophet ﷺ heard the ayah, and he said, it's correct, it's okay. Umar said, I know it like this. He recited it in his lahja, his dialect, his way of pronouncing. We don't know exactly what the difference was, but it could be like this, tu'minun or tu'minun, wal-ard, wal-ard. It could be something like this. And the Prophet ﷺ said, it's also okay. So he accepted these slight differences of pronunciation, right? This happened already in the times of the Prophet ﷺ. But this was not a big difference in, pronouncing the letters incorrectly or what was happening in the times of Uthman. That was already a dangerous stage. Now the difference between these dialects, these 7 dialects, also go back to a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ الْقُرْآنَ أُنزِلَ عَلَى سَبْعَةِ أَحْرُفٍ إِنَّ الْقُرْآنَ أُنزِلَ عَلى سَبْعَةِ أَحْرُفٍ فَقْرَؤُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنْهُ. This is in the Sahih of Bukhari and the Sahih of Muslim, متفق عليه. Very well known hadith. The Quran was revealed in 7 different ahruf. Ahruf could be translated as dialects. فَقْرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنْهُ. Choose whichever one you want from among them. So this is the origin of the 7 qira'at. This was later on put into order, into ruling. It was coded into rules, and books were written on the 7 qira'at of what the differences should be. If you choose one of them, one of the ways of pronouncing or reciting, then you have to stick to that one. So if you recite by hafs, you have to stick to hafs. You cannot mix. If you recite warsh, then you have to do warsh. You cannot mix it together. You can do one, then finish, and then do another one. But you cannot mix it together because mainly, of course, nowadays, most of us don't know Arabic properly, and this is how it was transmitted. So the 7 qira'at, the 7 recitations, come from that origin, from the 7 ahruf that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned. 7 different dialects of the Arab tribes. Now the 7 qurra are Imam Nafi', first one. Imam Nafi' was from Medina. Imam Ibn Kathir, who was from Mecca. Abu Amr, who was from Kufa, if I'm not mistaken. Ibn Amir, who was from Basra, if I'm not mistaken. Asim is the teacher of Hafs and Shu'bah. Hafs is the one we all know, because 90% of the ummah nowadays recites Quran with Hafs. Hamza and Al-Kisa'i. These are the 7 recitations which are mutawatira. They are very, very well known. Mutawatira means hundreds of people transmitted the same way of reciting to hundreds of people, and then so on for generations. And then these imams, all they did was to organize this knowledge and to code it and to make a book on each one of the recitations. So they became famous for them. So the qira'ah took the name after the imams who were famous for knowing the rules of certain recitations. So the names are after the imams. But this has nothing to do with the event of Uthman, remember, at the time of that battle in Azerbaijan, or nothing to do even with the first crisis, which was the one in which Umar advised Abu Bakr to compile the first book, the first compilation of the Quran. That was because of the Huffaz were dying. So this is not at all an issue to discuss about, because the differences are very slight, and this is nature of languages, that different areas have slight different ways of saying certain words. So nowadays, if you go to Morocco or Mauritania or Algeria, they recite in the riwayah of Warsh and Nafi'. Warsh and Nafi'. Some areas of Mauritania and Tunisia, they recite Qalun and Nafi'. Qalun is the other student of Nafi', because every one of the 7 reciters has 2 students. So this is, I think, part of the rahmah of Allah, that there are different ways of reciting the Quran, but there is only one text, one Quran, and the words are all the same, and the order is the same. And this is the rahmah of Allah, that He has promised to preserve and to keep and to protect His book, and He has done so. And there have been times when the enemies of Islam have tried to destroy the Quran. For example, the end of Al-Andalus period, Muslim Spain, which lasted almost 800 years. Muslims were expelled eventually from Granada. Granada was the last city where Islam ruled in Spain. And then Fernando and Isabel took over, and the Inquisition started. You know about the Inquisition, Mahakim al-Taftish. And so all the mushafs of the city were gathered, and they were put up in a pile, a huge pile, in Bib Ramla. The place where this happened, we still know it. I can take you there if you want. If you go to Granada, you can visit this place, Bab al-Ramla, Bib Ramla. And they made a huge pile with all the mushafs, and they burned them. They didn't burn them in the way Uthman radiallahu anhu burned the mushafs, which was in a respectful way. And that's how I told you, that's how we get rid of any paper which has the name of Allah or Quran written on it. We burn it. Or you can also bury it. Or like in Morocco, when I was memorizing the Quran in Morocco, they do it with the wooden lawha, the wooden board. So every day you would write your piece of Quran that you're memorizing, you memorize it, and the next morning you go tell the teacher, the ustad, and then you go and wash it with water. Previously you have applied a thin film of clay so that it would be easily washed. So the water that comes out, we don't throw it through the drain, because it has the words of Allah. Look at the respect. So you put it on a bucket. There's a big bucket there. All the students are washing their lawhas, their boards. All the water is coming down to the bucket, and they take that bucket and put it on the earth. They take it to a garden or to some earth. They put it on the ground. They don't throw it to the toilet or down the drain. So this is a respectful way of disposing the Quran. That's how Uthman did it. How the Catholic Christians of Granada did it was a different way. They wanted to get rid of the Quran. They wanted to say, Islam is not here anymore, it will not be practiced here, and we're going to even get rid of their book. We're going to destroy their holy book. So they made this huge pile and they burnt it. You cannot destroy the Quran, like I said, because the Quran is not that book. The Quran is not that book with pages. That's the mushaf. That's a backup. But even if you burnt all the mushafs in the world, we could still get together and write in every area. Just here in Kuala Lumpur, you get together all the huffaz, they could write down the mushaf. In Morocco, in Pakistan, in Turkey, in any city, major city of Muslim lands, you gather all the huffaz and they can get together and write down another mushaf. So that's not a problem. So they tried to do that in Granada after the fall of Al-Andalus. They never destroyed the Quran. That cannot be destroyed. So this is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again said, and I go back to the ayah that I mentioned at the beginning, إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. We have revealed the Quran, the reminder, and we will preserve it. Sadaqallahu al-Azim. I think this is enough for tonight. If there are any questions or anything you'd like to mention and that I can answer, I will try. Otherwise, we call it a night and we go to Makan.
Thank you very much, Sidi Bashir, for the very enlightening and very interesting talk. Alhamdulillah. Does anybody from the audience have a question? I have one question at least for now. How long did it take Sayyidina Zayd Thabit to finish the first Mus'haf?
The one he wrote in time of Abu Bakr?
Mus'haf Abu Bakr.
I don't know. I have to make some research. But it wouldn't be very long because remember Abu Bakr only ruled for 2 years. So it couldn't be very long. The event of the Battle of Yamama took place 1 year after the death of the Prophet. So after 1 year of Khilafah, it must have been less than 1 year, of course, because then he passed away. Abu Bakr had only 2 years of Khilafah. So I don't know exactly how many months, but it must have been less than 1 year. I'll try to get back to you, inshallah.
Questions? Yes.
So when they compiled the 5 different Qurans and distributed to the major cities at the time, was that also just leather that they wrote the Quran on, or was it some other material that they used?
Sorry, say again?
So when they wrote the Quran, they wrote 5 different Qurans and distributed to different cities at the time. Was that just leather?
It was camel leather.
Camel leather.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people ask, are these mushaf still available? Of course, they cannot be. This was 14 centuries ago. 14 centuries ago, and they were camel leather made mushafs. So there's no way they could last for so long. So later on, of course, new copies were made until paper came in, and then, they would always write Al-Mushaf Al-Uthmani. If an official copy was made, that's why they would say Al-Mushaf Al-Uthmani, to refer to Uthman, that this is copied from one of the original official universal mushafs that Uthman made, the 5 copies. But the original copies, they were written on leather. They would probably be about this thick. There's still a leather mushaf written in Egypt. I don't know in which museum. You can probably look it up in Google. There is a museum in Egypt where they keep a leather mushaf, which is very, very old. Of course, it's not one of the Uthmani mushafs, but it's very old. It might be a few hundred years old. And it's about this thick. I'm not exaggerating. It's a book like this table almost. Might have to come closer.
Were the Kuffars or the people who compiled the Quran under huge threat from the anti-Islam during those times? After that Abu Bakr?
Under stress?
After the first few compilations, were they going through a lot of threat from the anti-Islam?
Not that I know. Of course, Islam was becoming the new superpower. Islam was any threats there. Islam was becoming powerful at that time.
So it's more of a concern to streamline so everybody can practice with the same kind of reading and...
Oh, you mean from among the Muslims themselves?
Yeah.
Not that I know. I think most of the major Sahaba agreed that this was a good idea. And this is why Uthman consulted the Sahaba. He didn't just listen to Hudayfa and said, okay, let's do it. And this was the procedure of most of the Khulafa, that they would gather the major Sahaba to help them make the big decisions. So he gathered the Sahaba and they all unanimously agreed that the Mus'haf should be written, because they really saw the danger of what was going to happen. And this is very fast, you know. These followers of Jesus, followers of Isa alayhi salam, didn't take very long to make him a god and to worship him, and to make the Trinity. This is all new, and to make the New Testament. This all happened after his death. This has nothing to do with his teachings. So these things happened very quickly. So the Sahaba knew that, you know, if we don't take action swiftly, these things are going to happen.
Alhamdulillah. Any last questions before we close then? Alhamdulillah. I think we better close then, inshallah. Thank you very much for those who have asked questions. And thank you very much to the Bashir for the
Most
talk.
welcome.
Alhamdulillah. I hope tonight we have at least learned a little bit of the history of the Quran, and we get a bit of appreciation as well for the Khulafa Ar-Rashidun and the Sahabi at that time for compiling such a great book, or compiling the Quran to the Mus'haf, which we have today, right, which we can continue to recite and gain barakah from. Right? It's, those of us who are in publishing or developing books, we would understand how difficult it is just to get a book out. So, shukran that Brother Bashir, shukran to all of those who have come tonight and to those who have been patiently watching us online. I wish you all a good weekend. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum. Just close with a short dua.
That's right.
And sorry also regarding the question of Iman, that this is what was meant by the crisis. That the Sahaba and particularly the Khulafa took action before the crisis actually came. The crisis is this big disagreement in the book of Allah, which is the main, it's the core of the deen, you know. So this was what was meant by crisis and how it was solved by the Sahaba and namely by the Khulafa Ar-Rashidun. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم وارض اللهم عن الخلفاء الراشدين أبي بكر وعمر وعثمان وعلي والحمد لله رب العالمين سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.